Make Art, Don't Starve podcast. I'm your host, Al. Unfortunately, Kelsey couldn't be here with us today, but I am joined by the photographer, Chloe Price. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi. So I am Chloe. I am 25 years old and I am a portrait, wedding and lifestyle photographer based in the UK. So I shoot families, weddings, anything commercial really, but then I also have my personal work, which is very fairy tale based, very vintage based, and that fine art kind of thing. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. So I was looking at your, obviously when Kelsey told me about your work and wanted you on the podcast, I was looking at your Instagram and of course your website, and just everything is so gorgeous. I love that very whimsical fairy tale aspect. Oh my gosh, so pretty.
Oh, thank you so much. I think it's kind of a way to get your childhood out.
Yeah.
It's definitely fun. I have so much fun going to antique shops and looking at dresses and buying things online and crowns on Amazon and everything like that. So it's definitely a lot of fun and it's something that I really love.
I have so many questions about the nitty gritty of a photo shoot and all that stuff. But first I want to ask your career history, because it's very interesting, a very interesting turnaround that you've done. So I would love to hear about your whole, whatever you're comfortable sharing, but your history that got you to this point.
Yeah, so I've always loved doing photography. I think I grew up with a camera in my hand. My earliest memories are making very cringy photo shoots and music videos with me and my cousin. We were going through our angry teenage phase. So there's all of these videos that are still on YouTube because I can't remember the username of how to delete them or the password or anything. So they're all on YouTube somewhere of her in the back garden singing. But I refound my love for photography, I think, after I'd gone to school, then I'd done my A-levels. I think I saw a lot in my friends that we kind of went through the formal education and got sidetracked in a way from our creative goals of thinking that we needed to get a real job. But I noticed a pattern was that when we got that little bit older, so when I got to 21, we kind of reconnected with the things that we should have been doing all along but maybe didn't have the confidence to do. So I went back to college and I studied there and I refound my love for photography. It all made sense. But at the same time, I was working part-time in a GP surgery. So I work for the NHS. I work as a receptionist. Well, I did work as a receptionist on the desk. So yes, I'll touch in a little bit about the reasons behind why I decided to stop and what happened when I left. But I was also studying a HND at the time, and my last year of my HND I wanted to focus on studying, I wanted to focus on working as much as I could, so I decided to leave that job for that year because I had my student loan, so I was covered in regards to finances. Now I've actually gone back, so I am doing a teaching qualification at the moment at the same college that I studied at, so that's really interesting to see that other side of it. And I'm also doing coding, so I'm very busy, but I do still have my photography as my part-time business, and I still love it as much as I do. It's a little bit of a juggling act at the moment, to be honest.
So you're working right now and photography is part-time. Is your goal to eventually do photography as a full-time thing, or do you intend for it to always be part-time? What's your plan with that?
I would love photography as a whole to be full-time, but I think if I was looking at doing freelance 24/7, I know myself and I know that I would fall out of love with it. Obviously, when you're working freelance as well, there is that instability. So my goal long-term is to split it in the middle between teaching and lecturing, whether that's a freelance business in itself or I'm working for an institution, and then having the commercial business where I'm doing the weddings and the families and all of that stuff.
So you mentioned that you work with companies and clients. How does that compare to for you as a photographer? I don't know anything about the photography space, so I would love to hear about overall the photography space and especially what that looks like, the difference between freelance, personal, client, customer, what that difference is.
So do you mean the difference between working as freelance and as a staff photographer, or just the difference between,
like, or whatever the thing is I don't even understand the lingo. Like, I don't even know what the difference is. So however, like, your career has been working, the difference between working for like a wedding versus working for like a company versus just doing your own stuff, like, what do those differences look like financially, creatively? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, so I would say that the commercial side of it very much does fund the creative side. So in regards to a wedding, or say for example if I was shooting a client like a family photo shoot or a maternity photo shoot, there is that element of pressure there, and it's something that I really love for a different reason, which I'll touch on in a second. But yeah, I think the personal work, it's just me having fun with my friends. It's how I started photography, was just in a field somewhere, covered in mud, probably freezing cold. And yeah, I'm really thankful that the commercial side is able to fund that fun side. The reason why I have such a split, I think, is because when I was looking at quitting my job, so as I said, I worked in a GP surgery, and I think over time, if you work in that kind of environment and you work on the phones, there's a similar kind of the same kind of people will phone in. So it's either usually people who need the service, unfortunately, they're obviously not in a very good way, or their families as well. So I would have these really sort of heart-wrenching conversations. For example, I had this way too many times where someone would phone me up and they would say, I feel like my mental health is so bad, I'm struggling so badly, I don't know what to do, I don't know what the services are like out there, but I feel like if I don't get help now, then I'm going to go down a really bad path. But then in the same way, I also feel like I don't know if I'm bad enough, and, you know, people have it so much worse than me. And I would have that conversation multiple times. Or it could be something like a palliative patient, so someone who is at the end of their life and is going to die. So you're talking to their families, and then you pick up the phone when the inevitable has happened. And I think with that job, what I really loved about it was what I did mattered. And even if those people didn't remember me, even if those people didn't remember the conversation that we had, what I said and how I showed up really mattered. So when I left the job, I was looking at, originally I wanted to just work in fashion photography and do basically what my personal work is now. And I was very adamant that I would not be the photographer that would go in and do the odd wedding or the odd family shoot and then just completely sell out and go and continue just doing that and not do my personal work as my career because the money was more available. And that's exactly what I did, but not just for the money. I think the first client that I had, it was a maternity shoot, and like I always do, I was panicking. Imposter syndrome is real. And I was full of anxiety and thinking, oh, you know, I've never done this before, and trying to plan it. And a couple of nights before we were to shoot, I was stalking her on Instagram, and I saw a post where she said that she had actually had a miscarriage, the pregnancy before the one that she was currently having. And she was filled with anxiety about what could potentially happen. And I think as a woman you can kind of empathise with that. I know I definitely can. And I just had this realisation where I was like, this isn't about me. This is more important than whatever it is that I'm worried about. And I need to show up in that way. And I felt like up until that point there was something missing when I was looking at it just being fashion and vintage style. That rewarding kind of feeling was missing. So I reframed it in a way, and I thought, okay, well, instead of maybe sharing the worst parts of someone's life with them, maybe I can share the best parts. I can share their weddings and their, you know, when they have babies, and there's going to be elements, you know, that are sad within that. But that's when I really changed, and I wanted to be maybe a little bit too emotionally involved with my clients. But to me, that was definitely worth it. and I've worked with people, and it's just like a conveyor belt of weddings. Like they're part of a team, and they maybe do 4 weddings, in a row, and they're completely tired, and they just don't care about the clients. And that's fine if that's, what you want out of photography, and it's just that finance that you're looking for, that's
right.
fine. But for me, it was much more important to have that emotional connection with my clients and to look at it that way.
Absolutely. That is so fascinating. I can definitely see where that parallel is drawn between working in a GP and having to be that kind of silent but very important role in people's lives and very hard times in their lives, and how that can translate to kind of doing the similar but opposite thing in photography. Like, people might not remember necessarily you, or at a wedding, I don't necessarily remember the photographer, but the photos are always going to be there and will always be, whether they're good or bad, is always a major part of those events. So that's so interesting that kind of mindset carries over to this job. Like, that's not something that I would ever really consider an overlap being between those two things. That's so interesting. Do you think this is more meaningful as a job than your previous, than that experience or anything else you've done as a photographer?
I think they're just different, to be honest. I think, again, it's the different levels of stress as well are different. So obviously when you're freelance, it's just you, and there are so many things that can go wrong. But then also if you're part of an institution like in the UK we have the NHS, or GP surgery, then there's added stress on that because it's on such a bigger scale. But it is just different. I mean, the GP surgery is over now. I don't really want that relationship with the patients anymore, because I feel like I get it from my photography. I get to speak and just get to know people that I wouldn't otherwise. And like you said, just know them in a really intimate way. Whether they remember me or not, I'm a part of their lives, whether they like it or not.
I love that. That is so, that's such a fun way to think about it. As a traditional artist, one of my favorite things, especially that this podcast and my YouTube channel, is having that relationship with people. I'll get these messages that you've inspired me, you've made me pick up art again. And it's that connection that really makes it feel very worth it. And I'm not necessarily working one-on-one like you do. Sometimes I'll get commissions for maybe deceased family members. I'm painting a portrait of them, and just knowing that I get to be there for that client and do that for them, and in any way kind of make an impact in their life, is so rewarding. And I can only imagine getting to do that very one-on-one, being there for that moment for them must be so exciting.
Yeah, it's absolutely lovely. And that is, I think part of being online as well is you get people who message you and say that you've inspired them, and you're like, well, I didn't even expect this. Obviously you put yourself out there, hoping that would be the case. But when people actually reach out to you and have concrete things of ways in which you've helped them, it's a little bit surreal, definitely.
Absolutely. So kind of changing gears a little bit, I mentioned I don't know anything about photography. I would love to know how much of, first of all, I love your commercial stuff. For the jewelry companies, I don't care about jewelry photos. And then I saw yours and I was like, I want to buy this stuff. It's so beautiful. But when you're doing your creative work, so you mentioned you go to the antique shops and you buy stuff. Is literally all of it you? The makeup, are you directing literally everything? Is that your job as the photographer? Or are you kind of just taking pictures? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, because the jewelry imagery is actually my weakest, and it's I never would have thought of it that way. I think because you compare yourself to the professionals who have the studios and everything. So honestly, that is the biggest compliment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You do amazing work. You convinced me. I think you could convince me to buy just about anything.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. So I think when you're first starting out in photography, you have got to be a bit of a one-man band, so you've got to do everything. But I think the wonderful thing about photography, and specifically fashion or fine art photography, is that team aspect.
Yeah.
So as I've been growing, I've realised that if it's my personal work, then I'm probably going to have a lot more control over it, and I'm going to have a lot more input in the ideas. But at the end of the day, I am a photographer. It's not my job to do everything. And the truth is, the way to elevate your work is to work with people that specialise in that area. Yeah. So, if we look at it, for example, if, it comes to a TV company. They don't hire one person to do everything. They hire specialists to do each individual thing because they know that they're going to get the best outcome. So I would say probably a year in, I started working with people, and I would just find them on Facebook. To begin with, it was students, that were looking for photographers for their projects. And I have made wonderful friendships now with hair artists, makeup artists, these really talented people, designers. And I just think it takes your work to that next level. Yeah. And it's so inspiring as well to work with them, because they have skills that I could only, dream of having. And then obviously you get the clients that you work with. For example, you might have someone who creates jewellery or, creates a planner or something like that. And that in itself is a really good connection, because I often work with smaller businesses. Again, that emotional connection is really important to me. So I'm more likely to work with a smaller business compared to a large one, just because I can emotionally connect more. But we're all women in business, we're all startups, we have a lot in common, and we learn a lot from each other as well. So again, I think that's another element of that connection and that emotional building with other people. But yeah, definitely teams, I love working in them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that, the way you described, you're all women, you're all startups, and you're all small businesses. That's so fun. That sounds like such a fun environment to work in. That sounds like the dream. That is so cool. Yeah. Is there any project or group or team that you've worked on or with that stands out as your best experience?
Let me have a think. I think there is one particular person. So can I shout her out or just say her name?
Yeah.
Is that all
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's one particular person, Miriam Bibby. So she's a hair and makeup artist. We met, like I said, she was a student, and then we met and we worked together. And I think we just get on so well that we were friends from the beginning. And one thing that I really love about photography as well is I was so shy when I started. I would not talk. I was so reserved, and photography was really great for me because it forced me to get out of my comfort zone, and it was my job to make the person I was taking photos of feel comfortable. Again, it wasn't about me and what I was worried about. Yeah, so I think Miriam and I met at a really pivotal time, and I just remember this recent photo shoot that we had. So it was me, a model who was a friend as well. We had a dress from a designer. It was very avant-garde, very beautiful. I'll send you a photo so you can put it on screen if you want to. Yeah. And it was just so creative, and we just had fun. We were just, in the city centre, we just laughing all day, and it was personal work, but obviously that lends itself to your portfolio, so then you can approach other people with it. And it just reminded me of my photo shoots when I started, when it was fun. So I think that was the latest photo shoot I did, and my favourite. Maybe just every photo shoot that I do at the time is my favourite. But yeah, that was definitely a fun day, and we just laughed the whole day.
That's awesome. I would love to work with a photographer at one point, because it sounds like it's just such a fun, intimate, but casually intimate experience. Just hang out with creative people and create something collaboratively. That sounds so fun.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely. I would recommend it.
Kind of changing gears again, going back to kind of the business aspect. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was the idea of starting a business as a non-business oriented person, which I think that describes me. With my business, I am very much a go with the flow. Whatever happens, happens. I'm planning, but I'm not worried about it necessarily. I'm just doing what I can. And how has that gone for you? Are you similar? Are you different?
I am definitely on the more laid back side, but to be honest, I think mine probably comes more from that lack of self-belief and maybe a little bit of avoidance as well.
Gotcha.
So I was really lucky that I worked with a company. They're a charity organisation, and they offer business mentorship. So I did have a little bit of guidance and someone forcing me to kind of make goals. But, if it was up to me, I think I would be, very much go with the flow. Yeah. And I can say it's worked for me for what I personally need. It's created a business that I love rather than one that I resent. And that's what photography is for me. It's, you know, like I said, something that I want to be emotionally involved in. Has it limited me in certain ways? I'm sure. I think obviously you are going to be limited to a certain extent if you're not planning and very methodical. Right. But I think it's all about what you want and what you want out of it. And you can definitely get there. And I think a lot of people are like us. It's common sense that we will be drawn to the people that are very methodical and organised. Like, I know I watch so many YouTube videos of people like plan with me and productive vlogs and all of those things. Yeah. And I always say it's natural for us to be drawn to those people because they want what we have. But the truth is that, you know, especially online, we can very easily compare ourselves to people where it looks like it's perfect and just that upward trajectory all the time. Yeah. It's not always like that. There are going to be delays, and even the people that you look to that seem to have this like amazing quick growth and nothing ever goes wrong, I can guarantee that behind the scenes there have been ups and downs. Yeah. So yeah, I'm more laid back, I will say, overall.
I think the thing about being in a creative career is, like, I think a lot of creative people tend to be kind of that go with the flow. I'm not a math person. Not that business is like intrinsically like math, but like I can barely do like regular mental math. And so like when it came to like taking this seriously as a career and thinking about taxes, like I was like, hey mom, what are taxes? Like, how do taxes work? Like I having to think about like projected growth and how am I going to achieve this goal was just really, really hard for me, and it took the fun out of it a lot. Like there are some ways that kind of looking at your channel growth or looking at, you know, how much money you made when it's a good number, it's encouraging and it's exciting. But a lot of ways it was like, I don't want to do that. Like I just want to make art and like enjoy it, and I don't want to, like you said, like it lets you foster a career that you love rather than loathe. And I think if I worried too much about that stuff, I would end up hating it. Like, that's kind of why I didn't go to art school, is I didn't want to end up, like, hating it. I didn't want there to be all these rules and needed numbers and all this stuff. And so I think having that, like, laid-back mentality really helps foster, like, a genuine love and appreciation for your career. But like you said, there's definitely limitations. There's a lot of things that I feel like maybe I haven't grown as quickly as I could because I didn't care about certain aspects of the career. And there's ways that maybe I could have been making more money and I could be supporting myself earlier if I did certain things. And it's such a weird balance. And if Kelsey were here, I think she's kind of the opposite of us, where she's very goal oriented. She's really great at planning. She's really good at numbers. She loves analyzing stuff. And I think she would have some great insight. But I know for me, it's very much like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And it's really hard to like force yourself to kind of do that stuff. And I think that's one great thing about like working, like you talking about working with a team, is kind of in this scenario where you get to interact with other artists and learn from other people, and like we get to talk, and when we've interviewed other people, having that perspective of like, what do these people do that I can kind of learn from in a way that doesn't necessarily feel the same as like having to do math. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally relate. And I think I very much got discouraged at first. I'm not the kind of person to give up on anything. I think that's the reason why I didn't. But I launched my freelance business in April of 2020, and it was a face-to-face business. It was a very interesting choice. But I think because of that, around that time when I didn't really have the clients coming in, it was kind of a rough start, to be honest. And obviously there was a lot of expenses going out and not much going in, and I did get discouraged, and it just felt like I was spending all of my time on my computer setting up things like business bank accounts, and I didn't understand anything like insurance or contracts or anything like that. And I, you know, did resent it for a while, because I just felt so lost, and I just, like, I'm exactly like you, like my brain just didn't work that way. But what's so interesting now is I am deciding, so I'm doing my teaching qualification, and I'm deciding what I want to teach, and funnily enough, I'm landing on the professional practice. And I think the reason is because for so long I kind of wanted to know that stuff, but I didn't know where to start, and my brain didn't work that way. So now that I've got a little bit of knowledge behind me, I'm not, you know, whoever business guru. I'm not a business guru, but I'm getting there, and I know a lot more. And I remember one of, you know, my models, she actually, the jewelry business that we were talking about the photos with one of them, she started a business and she was asking me for advice, and I at this point still felt very bad about myself and felt like I don't know anything. But I was saying, okay, if you want to make a logo, then you need to go on this website because it's going to be free rather than paying for it.
Right.
And then once you make this much money, that's when you have to register and you need to keep records of your finances. And then I think that was really good because it was kind of like, oh, okay, I do know a little bit.
Yeah.
I might not know everything, but I'm getting there. And I think that is one thing I would tell people as well. If you're at the beginning and you don't understand anything about that stuff, don't worry. You will get there. It's hard, especially for creative people, but it will sink in eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, that beginning stage, it's one thing that is really frustrating as someone who is not, like, we don't have that mind that lends itself to learning those things or understanding those things or knowing where to start, is like that feeling of like, yeah, where do you start? Because there's so much stuff that, like, no one, like, even if I were to Google it, like, I wouldn't get it. Like, there were so many things that, like the business accounts and taxes and insurance and needing to, like, do you need an LLC for this? And, like, how does this work if you work with a contractor, or you need, like, if you need a, like, what counts as a business expense? And even things that I didn't know, like, the fact that having professional headshots would have been really nice to know, because even now I'm too lazy to get them. So every time any company needs a headshot, I'm like, oh, let me go take a picture really fast. And, like, getting, like, a logo, like, I didn't think about, like, when would I need to worry about, like, a logo or, like, branding. Having a set branding would have been great to know in the beginning. And especially, like, I think for a lot of people who are creatives and kind of maybe a little bit more similar to my path than yours, where I kind of stumbled into it, I didn't necessarily set out to, like, have a career, is it kind of happens over time, and you're, like, not realizing that you're turning into a business, and it's like you don't have the chance to, like, realize, oh, I need a logo, oh, I need branding, because it's been a year, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm already a business and I didn't do any of that stuff. But there's so much of that stuff in the beginning that, like, you don't think about and you don't realize that you would need, and you don't know how to do that until a company is talking to you and you're like, I don't know what any of these words mean, and you have to Google it, and it's so stressful. So that's awesome that you're gonna, like, be teaching that stuff, because I'm sure it's gonna help you understand better, and it'd be great to have people deliver that information.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people have taken to YouTube, to be honest. That's why I love this podcast, because you talk about the things like sponsorships and all of the behind the scenes, the things that I'm interested in, but I wouldn't know where to start with. It is one of those things, I think, a lot with business, especially when it comes to pricing and charging and those kinds of things. No one talks about it.
Yeah.
And it is a negotiation process, and I know for me it can be so overwhelming that I don't even want to get started, because where do you start?
Yeah.
And that was definitely, when I started my channel, my goal was to show that getting the business bank account and showing the first difficult things. I wanted to kind of document what I went through as I was going through it. And there were things that, are hard as well, like when, you have your first client that doesn't like their photos. That's really difficult. And that's one thing that I like to try and share, and I think that's why I'm drawn to this podcast, is the truth behind it and sharing all of those things as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is a great time to plug your YouTube channel.
Okay.
If viewers, if you would, or listeners, if you would like to hear more about that kind of behind the scenes stuff, check out Chloe's YouTube channel. I do want to mention, you mentioned contracts, and I think this is a great time to talk about. I have a question about, like, how was it learning? Contracts are so difficult. Like, they are so scary, and especially if you're working with, like, companies who they have a legal team, they know this stuff already, and it's just like you, and you've, like, worked with one company before. And I can only imagine photography, clients, companies, it's got to be a lot of information that you need to put in there. How was that process, learning how to do that?
So, a little bit of truth. So when I first had my first client, I didn't really know what to do in regards to contracts. So I'd heard other photographers talking about it and the things that you needed to include, but I didn't understand any of, like, the legal jargon or actually anything to include. I felt a little bit overwhelmed, so I just kind of avoided it. And I made this contract that was so basic, like